course, we've all been waiting to see somebody put cuts down, spending cuts down
Spell
on
them out
paper.
for us.
Mm-hmm. You have gone there and you put down a lot of spending cuts. Tell us about your plan.
Well, we're just getting started, Joe. This is just a modest proposal. We have $500 billion in cut. And the reason I call it a modest proposal is not that we're not serious. I call it modest because even if they adopted it, it would be only a third of 1 year's deficit. The cuts I'm proposing aren't even enough. And yet here in official Washington, everybody says, oh, my goodness, we could never cut that much. So I'm trying to get the debate started. But this is just the beginning. And I want people to realize the enormity of the problem we face, and that tinkering with 10 or 12% of the budget, freezing it at 2010 levels, does absolutely nothing to our problem.
Senator, we've all been shocked by what's been going on the House side of the Capitol, where a $100 billion plan to cut spending became a $50 billion plan, and now it's settled in the low 30s, which leads to the question, if the Republican House is afraid to move forward with real spending cuts, who in the Senate's going to support your bold plan?
Well, we're just getting started, and we have some convincing to do. But to give you an example of how bad the situation is, the president wants to freeze things at 2010 levels, but only 12% of the budget, the non-military discretionary spending. If the president gets his way, over the next 5 years, we add nearly $4 trillion worth of debt. If the Republicans get their way, we add $3 trillion worth of debt. So the Republican plan is better, but it's still too little, and we're drowning under a mountain of debt. You cannot get there by looking at a small segment of the government. The real compromise has to be conservatives have to admit that we can cut military spending, and liberals have to admit that we can cut domestic spending. The two have to come together for a meeting of minds, but the meeting of minds has to be that you have to cut across the broad swath of the whole budget.
Now, Rand, let's talk about our side for a minute. I find it stunning that there are Republicans who think we can balance the budget without touching the Pentagon, and who think we can continue fighting a war in Afghanistan where we spend $2 billion a week. What can you do? What can conservatives do to convince Republicans that we just can't keep running a global empire and balance our budget at home?
I think the first thing you have to tell people, and they have to realize, and I think most of them do, is they realize that a debt crisis looms. But the second thing you have to tell them is you can be a conservative. I am a conservative. I believe in a strong national defense. I think it's the primary constitutional duty of government. But it doesn't mean we have to have large land mass or land scale wars, and that maybe you can fight terrorism with a smaller military, with smaller isolated actions to snuff out terrorism where we find it. But that having large-scale wars may not be the opportunity or the best way to fight terrorism, and we can't afford it.
So I'm just wondering, though, in terms of your colleagues, your Republican colleagues, what is the problem? Because so many of them were so vocal about this. And now that it comes to actually having to crunch the numbers and talk about the cuts, are you having problems convincing members of your own party? Is that what you just told us?
Well, I think there's a disconnect. I'd say every Republican senator and probably every Republican congressman is for a balanced budget amendment. But the thing is you can't really be for a balanced budget amendment unless you're willing to step up and say we will cut spending.
Right.
And it can't be just a little bit. You can't freeze spending in a very small segment of the budget. You have to look at the whole thing. But the other thing is, like, my $500 billion in cuts was a 6% cut in the 2011 spending for defense. You can still have a strong national defense and do that. We increased military spending by 120% over the last 10 years. We went from 300 some odd billion to over 700 billion. So you can have a strong national defense. You can believe in a strong national defense and just say we can't give them a blank check. The conservatives aren't quite there yet, but I think what will convince them is that they see when they talk about freezing things at 2008 levels, just the non-military discretionary spending, that's still adds $3 trillion to the debt, that it's not enough. You know, I was at a presentation the other morning that said that Japan's debt is now so large that it's an inevitability that Japan will face a debt crisis. These people were quite certain, and these are quite smart people who look at sovereign debt. They think Japan's locked in a debt crisis of their own, and they think we're 1 to 2 years behind Japan. It scares the bejesus out of me, and there were Democrats in the room, too, who are waking up and saying, you know what, we've got to do something before there's chaos in our country.
John Heilman.
Senator, you raised some hackles in this proposal by suggesting that we end foreign aid to Israel and referred to it as welfare. I'm curious whether, given the kind of backlash there's been and some criticism of those comments, whether you've had any second thoughts about that, or whether you're still standing strongly by that proposal.
Well, the interesting thing is we presented $500 billion worth of cuts, and all of a sudden, half of the news stories were about 3/5 of 1% of our $500 billion. And I never isolated out one country. I said foreign aid for everyone. If you ask the American people, should we borrow money from China to send it to countries in Africa or the Middle East or anywhere, whether they're our allies or not? And I'm not against any country. The countries in the Middle East, like Israel, have been our allies. I'm a friend of and want to be a friend of. There are people within Israel who have proposed getting rid of this. Netanyahu at one time said it would be a good idea to get off of the dependency of foreign aid. In some ways, our foreign aid to Israel impinges on Israel and tells Israel that they can't do what they want to do as a sovereign country. I won't ever tell Israel what to do, and I won't impinge on their sovereignty, but I also just don't think we can continue to give them money we don't have.
Senator Paul, it's Willie Geist. Alan Simpson was out again on Sunday, one of the co-chairs of the Debt Commission, saying that any proposal to cut into the debt that does not go after Social Security and Medicare is not a serious one. But you, in your Wall Street Journal piece, right in the headline, say, I will not touch Social Security or Medicare. Do you have a plan to
well, it's not that's not exactly
later?
accurate. We didn't say we wouldn't touch it. We said in this particular bill, we wanted to prove to everyone that there was $500 billion worth of cuts without entitlements, just to get started. Within 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to propose a fix for Social Security. We're going to fix Social Security in one fell swoop for 75 years. Everybody knows how to do it. Everybody's afraid to do it. I'm unafraid to do it. They ran against me in the campaign. The Republicans ran against me. The Democrats ran against me because I said the age of eligibility will have to rise. If you raise the age of eligibility gradually, and we're talking about on those 55 and under, you fix the problem with Social Security, the vast majority of it. You probably will have to have some means testing too, but I'm going to propose it because I would rather not wait till these systems, entitlements collapse under their own weight, and then all of a sudden in 48 hours we have to throw together something. I want to propose it now in a reasonable fashion, and I'm unafraid if the voters of Kentucky say, you know what, we don't like you because you're going to raise the age of Social Security, I'm going to say the alternative is the whole system could collapse and no one gets Social Security.
So you don't care about getting reelected?
Well, no, I do probably care. I just got here, so ask me in 6 years about that.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's what I predict. I predict, just like Chris Christie, that if you talk frankly and speak boldly, you'll get more people to vote for you.
Now, what did I say? I predicted this when he was running, just like I predicted when Tom Coburn was running. You can tell there are a few people that go to Washington and don't change their stripes once you put on the pin. So Senator, I'm very excited because you've talked about cutting discretionary spending, not just non-defense, but also defense. That's something that your Republican brethren are not talking about, and sisters. You've also talked about a Social Security fix. You've also, of course, talked about the Pentagon. Of course, the 800-pound gorilla in the room now, Medicare and Medicaid. Obviously, you know that that's going to be 30 years out, our greatest liability. Are you working on a plan to also slow down the rate of growth for those two programs?
Yeah, it's a secret plan, though, and if I tell you, then you might tell other people. So right now it's secret, but yeah, we're going to fix the budget the first week. Yeah. The second month, I'm going to fix Social Security, and then the third month, we're going to work on Medicare.
There you go. On the fourth month, you can rest.
And good luck with that.
Easter recess.
There you go.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rand.
Good luck.
Okay, you got to admit, we always say people don't have the courage to come forward. He just went there.